Southern California, home to 19 million people from San Diego to Santa Barbara, the birthplace of fantasy. Dreams are fashioned here at Movieland and Disneyland, and there's magic in the air, except when reality rushes in. October 26, 1993, 2 a.m. That's when the brush fires of autumn came. They began in Escondido, a town of 100,000 people on the tranquil northern edge of San Diego County. High winds, Santa Anas, grew from an ominous stirring in high branches to a howling gale, ripping a power line from its mooring and sending it earthward in a shower of sparks. Dry grass burst into flame, and a holocaust beyond anyone's worst nightmare had begun. The Santa Anas blew through 6 Southern California counties with the rising intensity of a scream, fanning 17 of 26 separate brush fires into major infernos. These fires swept with awesome speed over 200,000 acres of some of the most valuable real estate in the world. 3,500 firefighters, the greatest force ever assembled, gathered from across the United States as the firestorms rushed over mountains and through canyons. Fire ate through the high ground. Smoke rolled over the ocean. And palm trees burned like tiki torches in the calamitous night. By the time the monster was beaten into submission, 3 people were dead, 4 critically injured, and 1,200 homes destroyed. Property losses would total almost $1 billion. But more than money, dreams, and memories would perish in the unforgiving flames, adding a dimension to the destruction that could never be recovered. "I have lost my past," one victim said. "I will never be the same again." How could it have gotten this bad? What evil chemistry of man and nature conspired to send flames rushing through the mountains from Ojai to Escondido? Part of it was nature's own ominous cycle, a long drought followed by heavy rains that thickened already dry chaparral into a deadly fuel along the waiting slopes. Part of it was the growing tendency to build in the mountains and canyons, amid the very growth that would enhance disaster. Wooden homes with wooden shake roofs nestled among trees and hidden in the underbrush would become funeral pyres to dreams of living where nature rules. Given those conditions, an additional factor contributes to the elements that turn a small fire into an inferno: the hot, dry desert winds we call the Santa Anas. Most prevalent in the autumn months of October and November, these winds come rushing downhill from the northeast through a door flung open at the Mojave by dynamics in the atmosphere 20,000 feet up. They're born in high-pressure systems over Utah and snake through mountains and desert toward the ocean, losing moisture as they rise over the ridgelines, gaining heat as they roar down the slopes. The Santa Anas increase in speed as they funnel through the passes. By the time they reach Southern California, the Santa Anas are howling at gusts of 100 miles an hour, blowing down trees and power lines, sending garbage cans clattering through the streets, setting off burglar alarms, and fanning flames in their path to speeds 6 times that of normal, at temperatures reaching 2,000 degrees. Always there are fires. Arsonists respond to the eerie winds by setting torches to the dry brush. Campfires blow wildly out of control. Downed power lines spark and flare. All of these were evident in the autumn of the firestorms. Hot wires set Escondido ablaze. A homeless man's campfire burned through Altadena. Arsonists turned Laguna Beach and Malibu into fiery war zones. Altadena suffered the first major losses in the growing firestorm, with 121 structures going up in smoke. But it was Laguna, with 366 homes lost, that became a symbol of wind's caprice. There, the flames that danced through neighborhoods like crones at a witch's ritual spread terror and destruction in equal measures. The hillside Emerald Bay section of Laguna illustrates the caprice. Fire swept down Emerald Canyon, consumed one house, and then skipped among many, burning some, sparing others. There was no logic to the destruction, but there never is when the Santa Anas come to call. Preparation is no guarantee of preservation. Indolence does not necessarily mean destruction. The wind makes its own rules. Fires burned everywhere throughout the bone-dry Southland. Thousand Oaks, Winchester, Chatsworth, Santa Paula, Box Springs, Yucaipa, Ojai, Temecula, Ortega, Banning. There was no one fire. The whole world was burning. But then the winds lessened, and fire by fire, containment came. Lines were thrown around the blazing hillsides, and it seemed for a while the worst was over. The feeling of euphoria lasted less than a week. 4 days after the end of the Laguna fire, the Santa Anas howled once more through the passes, and an arsonist set matches to dry shrubbery on a remote hillside of old Topanga Canyon Road. And it began all over again, headed for Malibu.
It started at that point about a half a mile from here, and then just blew south, southwest, south-southwest, across those hills, across those hills, across those hills, across those hills, into infinity or Malibu, depending on how you look at it. And there was nothing to stop it between here and the ocean.
Fire in the wind defies class standing. Ashes bear faint traces of status. The Santa Anas blasted the flames southwest toward the ocean and Malibu through the Santa Monica Mountains. This firestorm consumed 18,000 acres and 366 of some of the most elaborate homes in the country. Dick Van Dyke had to evacuate. So did Bruce Willis and Demi Moore. Zsa Zsa Gabor opened her nearby ranch to fire-threatened horses. Anthony Hopkins opened his apartment to celebrity evacuees. Sean Penn's home was among those burned. So was Ally McGraw's.
And it was a very creepy day. There were little fires around further up north in the canyons, and the Laguna fire was just under control. And I had a sinister feeling, because anybody who's lived out here as long as I have knows that the first week in October and even into early November is Santa Ana and pyromania time. It happens annually. And I remember thinking, you know, the air was very hot. It was like 90 at 7 o'clock in the morning, and very still, and it smelled funny, and the animals were sort of skitsy.
Pushed by gale force winds, flames rushed at speeds reaching 20 miles an hour through Malibu, Las Flores, Carbon, and Tuna canyons. Fire trucks and emergency vehicles lined Pacific Coast Highway like armored vehicles come to fight a foreign enemy. But in this case, the enemy was far more awesome than any army put together by nations. As sparks flew in the wind, new fires exploded in steep terrain, requiring a constantly shifting strategy among the forces fighting the flames on the ground and in the air. Helicopters and fixed-wing planes braved heat-generated turbulence and billows of blinding smoke to take their aircraft where only fools and heroes go, so that their water drops would have maximum effect. Especially threatened were isolated communities in the mountains, both in Malibu and Topanga. There, clusters of homes are tucked into nameless canyons or on scenic hillsides, sometimes on roads so narrow they could barely accommodate firefighting equipment. Firefighters with nothing personal at stake but honor and duty risked their lives to keep flames from homes they had never seen before and might never see again. It was a time of heroes that even Hollywood would have a difficult time matching. Not that it hasn't happened before. Malibu and parts of Topanga burned in 1958, in 1970, in 1978, in 1980, and in 1982. Lives were lost, homes burned, and chaos prevailed. Then, as now, animals suffered along with humans in the fire. While domestic pets from horses to cats were evacuated in most cases, coyotes, bobcats, deer, foxes, and raccoons had to escape the flames on their own. The toll on wildlife may never be known. Everyone and everything fled the terrible heat. Evacuations were widespread. Sheriff's Department and highway patrol units prowled through threatened neighborhoods with orders to evacuate booming from the public address systems atop their cars. Barricades set up at either end of major highways from the San Fernando Valley to the coast kept all but emergency crews out. In some instances, even media were banned. Homeowners had to be stopped with drawn guns when they threatened to crash their cars through police barricades to get to their threatened homes. Fire seemed to rush in all directions at once, convincing many of losses that never occurred.
Then it came down and completely obscured the house, and I saw the house disappear in a wall of smoke and flame. And so then I thought, I don't want to be the kind of person who sits around and watch it burn and then get all pitiful, you know. So I said something like to John, like, don't get discouraged. And he said, well, my dear, this is a wonderful opportunity for us to start over.
Individual stands were made at Pepperdine University in Malibu and along Topanga Canyon Boulevard. Firefighters were determined that the flames would not jump the boulevard and head east toward thickly populated centers around Pacific Palisades. Shifting offshore winds did send fire flying over the two-lane road, and for a while it threatened major population centers in Topanga itself. But here is a community of rugged individualists, and tales of heroics have already become part of the Topanga legend. Unable to get help from thinly spread firefighters, the men and women of the mountaintop town battled the flames on their own. In Red Rock Canyon, 3 brave men, totally surrounded by flames on ground so hot it burned the soles of their shoes, stood against mountains of fire on all sides that came within 15 feet. They saved the home occupied by Red Rock State Park caretaker Alan Martinez, one of the 3 who would not run. At the foot of Topanga Canyon Boulevard, as it joins the ocean, resident Shane McMahon and others were denied professional assistance. They set backfires on their own that saved a cluster of 25 homes at the foot of mountains burned black by the firestorm. A surfer who knew the winds, McMahon waited for the precise moment to set flames that would rush to meet the oncoming Holocaust and stop there.
My house is located at the bottom of a ridge, which the fire was rapidly approaching during the early mornings of the fire. A decision was made with the authorization of a fire captain that came down here to check on our situation, to light backfires. And as we lit our backfires, We set them in 3 or 4 locations along this ridge line here, which rapidly raced up to meet the oncoming flames.
As fire spread down the canyons, cars and trucks loaded with personal possessions sped away ahead of the flames. Their occupants filled evacuation centers in the nearby communities of Calabasas, Agoura Hills, and Pacific Palisades. Public agencies and volunteers brought food, clothing, and bedding to the centers and assisted in bringing families together that had been separated in the burgeoning firestorm. The fire was brought under control 2 days later. As police barricades came down, evacuees returned to either miracles or disasters. Homes still standing amid surrounding ruin, or homes reduced to ashes, with only a fireplace still standing.
So I decided that I wanted to see if the diamond earrings were here and if anything survived. And curiously, just sitting in the dust of what was really 2 stories worth of collapse and implosion were a wedding ring, unharmed, my school ring, unharmed, and a ring from my very favorite boyfriend, unharmed, sitting in this dust. And then 40 feet across the foundation, for no reason I can understand except the nature of the explosion or implosion, was this little tiny box of some base metal, and inside were these diamond studs.
One couple returned to find a note scrawled on the dust of a baby grand piano. Saved, Engine Company 57. Destruction was everywhere, but more than buildings were lost in the awesome firestorms of Southern California. British screenwriter Duncan Gibbons, fleeing ahead of the flames that started near the Topanga estate where he occupied a guest house, turned back to save his cat and lost his life. The cat was found later, alive. Ron Mass, a carpenter who lived on the same estate, was burned over 60% of his body. Here he emerges from the smoke to collapse into a fireman's arms. 5 hours later, and not far away, Don and Amy Yarrow, who loved nature more than any of civilization's niceties, died when flames caught up with them as they raced ahead of the roaring Holocaust in their old pickup. They had lived for half a century in a modest trailer tucked among trees and chaparral. They lit their home with car batteries and shared a trickle of water from their well with the wildlife that had come to know them. They died in the mountains they loved. Firefighters also paid a price for their courage in the firestorms of '93. 4 of them from Pacoima-based Engine 98, fighting the fires in Chatsworth, were seriously burned when flames washed over their fire truck in unbearable waves of searing heat. 2 of them, Cleveland Tipton and Gary Carpenter, were in the truck when a wall of fire 30 feet high advanced on them, sucking the oxygen from their cab and blowing out the windows. The other 2 men, Captain John Bernard and Russell Nakamura, were huddled at the rear of the truck. They were caught there by a sudden shift of wind that sent the blowtorch flames in their direction.
Suddenly the wind started, and I realized at that point that we were in trouble. We were standing in unburned brush at the time, and it was necessary for us to retreat immediately. Approximately 10 to 15 seconds later, we arrived back at the fire engine, and just as that occurred is when the storm hit. And at that point, we were all trying to struggle to find a place to protect ourselves. At the time that the fire hit, as I was standing in the roadway, I realized I'd been burned. And the thought actually passed through my mind, oh, well, it's only a 1st or 2nd degree burn. It can't be all that bad. But the main thing that was on my mind was survival at that point. How am I going to keep my crew from getting killed or hurt? And how are we going to get out of this thing? That was our main concern.
Captain Bernard was the most seriously injured and the last to be released from the hospital. All 4 men have come to symbolize what humans in their grander mode will risk for others. Before the fires of autumn had turned to ashes, investigations into their causes had begun. Of the 17, 9 were believed to have been set by arsonists, one of the deadliest and most difficult crimes to solve. The investigations go on, and as they do, new dangers arise in the hills and mountains denuded by the firestorms. A few days after the Malibu-Topanga fire was out, it rained, and the ground, shorn of protective vegetation, began to slip. Floods and landslides became a new jeopardy in areas that had not yet begun to recover from the wildfires. And attention was turned once more to the caprice of nature. It remains riveted there. Is it worth it, living in places where fire and floods and slides are a constant danger? Ask any mountain dweller, and he'll say yes. But will those who choose to live in Southern California's mountains and canyons once more pay in terror what they purchased in serenity? Could the infernos of '93 come again with all their terrible consequences? Look to the chaparral. Look to the homes in the canyons. Look to the temperatures. And above all, listen to the wind.